Hello and welcome to the Happy PharmD podcast. I'm Dr. Alex Barker, your host as always and founder of the Happy PharmD, where we help pharmacists get jobs they love. And I'm joined by someone who loves what she does, and it's even in her name. It's Kim Newlove, host and founder of Pharmacist Voice. Kim is someone who actually reached out to me many, many years ago because I shared, I think in a podcast or something somewhere, that I had done some voice work in the past for a video game that I think I was paid either nothing or like a few dollars. Just wanted a chance to say that I've done that. And I was very impressed with what she's done. And today what we will be talking about and diving into is thought leadership. This is something that it's talked a lot about in like business circles or people who want to get out there and speak, or maybe are already doing work like that. And I want to come at it from an angle of career development, that this is something that you can use and do, and it doesn't take a considerable amount of work to build up your authority on something to create new opportunities. We're going to talk about how Kim has done that with her platform. So Kim, hey, welcome.
Thanks, Alex. Good to be here.
Yeah, I've always enjoyed our conversations off air. So why not hit the record button and make it real, right?
Sure. Yeah, you've been on my podcast twice this year, or last year, I guess, 2022. It's my turn to be on yours, right?
It's time. It's time to return the favor. Granted, I would say our podcast was not very active, but now it is. So, how I was introduced to you, I believe at the time you had already had your podcast, I believe, right? It's how many years going now?
This is year 3. I'm celebrating my 3rd year in podcasting, the 3rd Friday in January 2023.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
But before that, you were a pharmacist, but
Sure.
also you did voice work.
I am still an Ohio licensed pharmacist, but I'm not in clinical practice anymore. Yes, I do medical narration and podcasting.
That's awesome.
Thank
So
you.
if I remember correctly from our conversations, to me, it sounded like a curiosity for you. That's how you got into voice work, right?
Actually, it was a deep respect for having a voice and using it. I have
Yeah.
a nonverbal son who has autism. I'm trying to think of how to explain this. He lets me read to him, and I was between jobs once upon a time in 2016. And while I was reading to him in his bedroom, I thought, he loves it when I read to him. Maybe some pharmacists or medical people would like it if I would read to them too. And that's kind of how it got started.
I don't usually endorse people who make really biased decisions like that, but good job. You made it work, right? Your son was very biased to your reading. Why not other people? That's really interesting.
Yes, and that's something that I wouldn't recommend other people going into voiceover work or being a voiceover talent because of, just because somebody says you have a good voice. It is an entire business. It's its own industry. And just because one person, like your child with a disability, thinks that you've got a great voice and he enjoys your readings, doesn't mean that other people will too. And it doesn't mean that I'm the right voice for every project. That took a little while to figure out as well.
There's beauty though in that simplistic fact that whatever your history is, family, career, work, there's some aspect there that holds a gold nugget of truth for a future of beautiful career work. And to my knowledge, you've worked in dozens of audio narration projects, and now you have this podcast, which has been building up your authority, your credibility, your thought leadership, as it were.
Yes, I'm a thought leader in that I am a pharmacist who's a voice actor and a podcast host. I believe that you can put all that together and you can monetize it. That
Sure.
is that is my thought. And yeah, I mean, I don't think that's every single thought that's associated with this, but At the very baseline, yes, I am a thought leader that you can use your voice to make money.
Yeah, not a revolutionary concept, but maybe for some pharmacists that have never even considered it. You know, the the concept here is to be able to write, speak, talk, or do something to showcase what you know and put it out in the marketplace. For many pharmacists, I feel like there's actually an initial hurdle that's a struggle because so much of our profession is built around a professional identity that is centered around the fact that our advice is free, right? You don't have to pay to talk with a pharmacist. And in my own research, for example, if you want to speak at a pharmacy conference, what you would be paid is not the same as what a doctor would be paid to speak at a pharmacy conference or at a doctor conference. This idea is kind of baked into our profession. When you were starting your career in voice acting and voiceover work, did you find it a struggle to charge for work?
That's a great question. I would say yes, in that I didn't know the right rate in the first place. In the voiceover industry, we have a rate guide. You can find it at globalvoiceacademy.com. And this rate guide shows if you're doing live announce stuff, which I've done at medical conferences. And I do want to talk about what you just said, pharmacists not making as much as the doctors, because that has happened to me. And I've done moderating or announcer work at doctor conferences. But
Mm.
anyways, I didn't know how much to charge. And a lot of times, you talked just a moment ago about how pharmacists give away their time. That unfortunately translated a little bit into what I do now. As a voice actor, I do something called e-learning. Someone will have an online course and they need somebody to narrate it. When I first started doing e-learning, I would meet with the client and I would ask, "What is your project like?" And I would get blank stares because this was their first project. A lot of times, okay, when I first started doing e learning, it was right when COVID was starting. I'm talking like March and April of 2020.
Yeah.
I would say, "What's your project like?" And I would get the blank stares. What does this have to do with giving away my time? What this has to do with is I have a sheet of questions that I ask the client. I took a very long period of time asking, what is this? What's your learning management system like? Am I going to be giving you strips of audio that you're attaching to video? What is this like? Am I reading off of slides?
Mm.
And they just kind of looked at me like, "Oh, those are all good ideas. Maybe we'll pick from one among them." They didn't have the script. And I
Yeah.
always ask, how many words are in this project? Like, what's your budget? There's so many questions that I would ask. So basically, I was giving away my time
Mm.
as a voice actor who is more experienced than the client. And I would end up giving them this sheet at the end, like, basically, once you figure it out, fill this out. Well, I don't do that anymore. In fact, I'm going to start charging. I haven't done e learning for several months, but I'm going to start charging for the consulting for doing that. Either that, or I'm going to not even take those as clients until they have their stuff figured out because all due respect to those potential clients, they waste my time.
Yeah, and that seems to be a lesson that most entrepreneurs learn or have to learn at some point, right? We give too much of ourselves, particularly pharmacists, right? Because this is how we're programmed, this is how we're trained. We
It's
give
the usual.
ourselves.
Yeah.
Right. So you did voice acting work, and then I know that you had kind of a revelationary or a epiphany moment where you said, "Oh, I could make a podcast doing this work." And so began your journey into thought leadership. When you initially set out to do this podcast, did you feel like this is what, I guess, rather than fill in the blanks for you, what did you hope this would do for you? What was the big dream?
Control the narrative and work on my brand, basically. Uh,
Whose narrative? The narrative for like you and who you are?
okay, when you have a personal brand, you get to basically tell the world who you are, right? So that when you're not in the room, eventually they'll be able to talk about you and say the things that you've said about yourself. When I started this podcast, it was actually in response to a conference that I went to, a session at a conference that was led by Aaron Albert. And Aaron was talking about thought leadership through writing and publishing. Thought leadership through writing and publishing. Publishing can be podcasting, right? During that session, bold girl that I am, I stood up and I said, Aaron, I love your books and I would like to narrate one of your books into an audiobook, right? And she's said, let's talk afterwards. But she said, if you know how to do audio engineering, you should look into starting a podcast. I had never put the two together because I barely knew what a podcast was. I
Mm,
was a business, but eventually I found that I could be a business with a podcast. And the podcast, there's always something that the podcaster gets out of it, something the listener gets out of it. And if you're good at what you do, there's something that you want the listener to do with the information. Podcasts have to have a purpose. Now, when I first started into voiceover, I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know what kind of microphone I needed. I didn't know it was its own industry. I didn't know about all the competition, the different genres, the rate guide, meeting with clients, all the things. When I started from nothing. I mean, I started an LLC. I did everything out of order. But coming back to the podcasting, once Erin, whose opinion I trust, and she's also a podcaster, I thought, I'm not going to ignore this piece of advice. I'm going to look into starting a podcast. Once I found Dave Jackson from the School of Podcasting, I found
yeah,
out
I
what,
know Dave.
okay, I found out what podcasting could mean to me. And combining what I learned about thought leadership from Aaron, combined with Dave Jackson and all the opportunities he introduced me to through podcasting, I was able to create my own podcast. And I think probably within a month of going through all of his video tutorials, I was able to start creating podcast episodes. Now, I didn't always publish everything that I created in the beginning because I was like, I don't know how I want this to sound. And it takes you a while to literally find your voice, how you want to present yourself. I was very meek and my voice was not as strong and I wasn't as confident about what I was saying. But over time, you really think about, what do I want out of this? What do I want the listener to get out of this? What do I want them to do with the information? And
Yeah.
every time you show up to the mic, you bring it. And I love that about podcasting.
And now to clarify for you, the listener, this is one of many different avenues that you can do with thought leadership. We're in the trenches now with Kim learning about podcasting, but realize that anytime you throw your voice out, whether it's in the written word or Twitter or a blog or a newsletter on LinkedIn, all of these things are free. Podcasting a little bit more involved. It doesn't have to be, but it is a little bit more involved. And these things are free. They just take time, a little bit of effort and energy and forethought. And over time, it leads to some really great results. And we're going to get to those. I'm excited to hear about what, the surprising moments perhaps for you. But I was curious about I think the initial moments you had are the idea that I'm going to call this the Pharmacist Voice. When I hear that title, I think about this is someone who's speaking about pharmacy outside of the profession, right? But
Yes, outside of clinical practice, absolutely, yeah.
it's a good caveat. Did you have that intention to go outside or build that brand beyond just pharmacy?
Yes, when I first, for the podcast only or just the business?
The Pharmacist Voice, yeah.
The Pharmacist Voice as a business, I wanted to combine my background as a pharmacist with my speaking voice. And
Mm.
I knew that that would ultimately mean a lot of things. First of all, I wanted to be a medical narrator, and I wanted to be an audiobook narrator too. I didn't know that I wanted to be a podcaster back in 2017
Sure.
when I filed for my LLC. I didn't even really know what a podcast was back then. I was just starting to learn about podcasts back, I want to say in 2019, right before I met Erin. I remember she asked me to show her my podcast app and what was in it. And I think I had 4 podcasts in it. I subscribed to 4 podcasts back then. I didn't know what it was. So anyways, I literally just wanted to be able to speak and do something that would be of benefit to
Mm,
pharmacists and medical professionals with my voice and my background as a pharmacist. It was so organic the way that my company began. What it says is what it does. Like I literally take my background as a pharmacist and my speaking voice and I go make money with my speaking voice. That's literally what I do. It's super easy to understand. And I'm laughing because I don't know if everybody else has this easy of a time figuring out what they want to do and what it's called. But if you just really take the time to funnel down all your ideas into one, sometimes you come up with just a winner. And I have a very solid brand and I know who I am and what I do. And it's even gotten better over time because I've gotten so focused on what it is that I do.
mm. Did you feel like that clarity happened right away, or did it get molded and shaped over time?
The funneling process,
Yeah.
I love making the funnel symbol with my hands because really, it did take time, Alex. It really did.
Mm,
I even made a podcast episode about it, and I talked about at least I don't know if it was half a dozen or more ideas of things that I wanted to do, like being a prevention specialist, like
mm.
injury prevention, or I wanted
Huh.
to do MTM where I went to people's houses but then I realized by talking to other people at the Metapreneurs conference who did those things how time intensive it is and all the different like a terminal distributor of dangerous drugs category 2 license that I would have to have had here in Ohio in order to have HIPAA information in my possession in my house, my personal computer, all that stuff. And I was like, no. And hearing about how many times people cancel appointments, need to reschedule, how available you need to be, I was thinking, no, I am the girl that needs something that I can do part time on the side because of my family situation. And having, if you could draw a box, and it's got the sides and the bottom, and you need to have all those variables, the husband, the kids, the amount of time you have, all the things that you want to do have to fit in the box and still have the box closed. I mean, that's what finding the right career for you is all about. You need to think. I have a poster up here of the Ikigai that you and I both know so well. What you love to do. You have to know what you love to do, what the world needs, what you can be paid for, what you're good at, and might I add, what you value. Like no weekends, no holidays, working 9 to 5, all the things, no travel. Although I say that with a smile because I do travel for my job now and I didn't expect that. But yeah, you have to think about all those things, try to get all the variables in your life to fit what you want to do inside and still be able to get the box to close.
Got to put in a plug at this point. If you'd like a little help with that, we have a resource called Your Happy Farm D Year. And this guide that's on the website, it helps you think about those things, and ask you questions about last year and this year and what you want from it in terms of your career, your finances, your health, and your relationships. And to me, those things are probably, they encompass so much of who we are, what we do, and tie in a lot of the aspirations and goals are. It's a great starting point, and I can almost guarantee you're going to get some sort of aha or a reflection moment to help you guide yourself into ideally a new and better future. Um, Kim, for you, you, I can, it, I didn't sense pain, but, and struggle isn't the right word either, but there's this concept of like battling creativity, right? And there's this idea that I struggle with to this day where I have too many ideas. I have so many great ideas, but when it comes down to it, they're not all great. They're not fantastic. And I know that when I I empty out my brain for my creative space, it really allows me to think and process what is the best thing. Um, in that episode where you shared all the different things that you wanted, was that like a reflection on what you went through, or was it more so you were in that moment of working it out?
I had already figured it out because I had already started the company. The episode that I'm referring to, I think I have all of my episodes because I'm a nerdy pharmacist and I love a good list. I have all of them written
That's
down.
crazy.
And I think it's the episode something like how I funneled all my ideas down into one. So
Hmm.
I funneled them down before I created the episode to answer your question. Oh, it's episode 22. There you go.
Go listen to it. If you're someone who's considering and using thought leadership, it's incredibly beneficial to hear how other people process their creativity. Because Kim, I can totally relate. I mean, I spent 5, 6 years building stuff before I landed on the Happy Farm D. Um, and those things helped build it what it is today. But I perhaps foolishly like pursued every creative endeavor that I had. Um, have you found a question or a thought process that's been particularly helpful with you narrowing your creativity?
Are you talking about when I was trying to decide, when I was trying to funnel my ideas down into one?
Even now, because you have an incredibly creative process,
Oh,
both in your
thanks.
podcast, but also in your business. I mean, it involves so much of not just you and the work, but also how you think about the work.
I want to say that what I do didn't have a name until I read this book. It's called The Red Thread. Do you know this
Okay.
book by
Yes.
Tamsin
Yeah, I
Webster?
read it.
Yes. I think if everybody took the time to tell themselves what the red thread is in whatever it is that they're thinking about, they would be able to put their finger exactly on what it is they're trying to do or
Mm,
say. You have to get the story straight for yourself before you start trying to push it out into the world. So, my creative process would be trying to find the red thread so that I'm not putting out there how I understand something. It's how somebody else will understand something because they haven't ever been me before or done this thing. So a lot of times I try to reverse engineer it. So it is for the listener, not for me to tell my side, but for them to understand how I got there. Like, for example, I just had a podcast episode about resources for pharmacists who want to narrate their own audiobook. I know how to narrate an audiobook and I know how I went about learning how to narrate an audiobook. But trying to provide something of value for a listener who doesn't have time to spend a whole entire year working with a coach, how can I distill it down to 5 actions? And that's what I did. So I would challenge anybody listening to this, if there's something that you really want to explain to somebody else, like why you want a job or, the career that you really want, try to find the red thread so that somebody else can understand what it is that you're trying to say. Don't make them try to figure it out the way it comes out of your mouth naturally. Like, think about who you're talking to when you speak.
it's a really simple truth that, I mean, even I lose sight of. I think it's very easy to lose sight of your end goal and what you're trying to communicate and who you're trying to communicate it to. Um, I'm reminded of past failed projects and things that I've done, even in the Happy Farm D, that just haven't landed. Um, we we came up with a success report for the Happy Farm D, where we track our clients, we track where they go in their careers, how quickly they got new jobs, and the initial like reception to it was, I would rate it as abysmal. Like there was
Really?
no interest in it. Um,
I've seen it.
and
It's very colorful. You've got to see it if you're
oh,
listening and you haven't seen it yet. It's beautiful.
oh, geez, thank you.
I checked it out. Yeah. And the list of careers that people have gone into is fantastic. And you have your little wheel with the pie chart and
Yeah,
all
yeah,
the,
yeah, yeah.
yeah, it's great. I love
It's
it.
it is great, but it comes down to this idea that it was made, branded, and marketed um, more from our perspective, and we felt like it's got a lot of great information that like gives us authority, credibility, and like we're publishing our success. Very few coaches do anything like that. But the problem I discovered after like thinking it through and talking to people is it's about us and it's not about you. It's not about them. It's not about our audience. There are aspects of that, but I feel like we could have done a better job at displaying the value to people and showing them, here's what you'll learn from this. If you check this out, here's the benefits, right? And it doesn't matter how long I'm going to be in business, I'm probably always going to get fixated on features of things versus the benefit, right? I don't know. It's my curse, I guess, if it's not yours.
I don't know if I know the difference as much. I guess the features would be a checklist of things, right? But the benefits would be what you can actually do with it. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, an analogy is you bought a car for your family because it's got the best safety rating out there, right? No other car is safer, or so they say.
Hmm.
A feature, though, of that car that attributes to that is a seatbelt. It's a buckle. It's a bumper. Those aren't sexy. Those aren't compelling. Like you don't want to look at a car because you're like, oh wow, look at that bumper. Like that. Not only does it look good, but it's going to protect me when I crash into a tree. Like you don't think that way. You think about what is this? What is the value of doing this? And I think your comment about the red thread, which is a great book, is poignant for anyone who wants to build thought leadership. Who is the audience and what is the value that you can bring to them? And if you're not really clear about it, it's almost better just to get started rather than going through the creative phase and not ever actually hitting the publish button. So
Okay.
I was going to ask, have there been things that you have created in your thought leadership journey that you've not published, or maybe you've been a little worried or scared about?
Hmm. I was a thought leader before I came into the whole pharmacist voice thing. I can tell you something and that I can only explain because I failed.
Sure.
When I left behavioral health, I worked at a behavioral health hospital from 2015 to 2016 as a relief pharmacist for a friend of mine that I volunteered with. When I left there, because she left and I didn't want to stay without her,
Hmm.
I wanted to understand why all these 25-year-old young people were addicted to heroin. And I went to my county's addiction task force, or it used to be the opioid. Yeah, it was the opioid task force or opiate task force. And I went in thinking that I was going to be a thought leader for them. And I didn't go in and read the room and sniff the atmosphere and determine how I could fit in. I just thought, I'm going to come in and I'm going to tell these people what's what just because I'm a pharmacist and I know about opioids and naloxone and all those things. What I learned is that, okay, I did want to find out why people were using the opioids, but I didn't understand my county, even where I live. I didn't understand it. I may understand drugs, but I don't understand people and why they use. or I should say past tense, because now I really get it. So when I went in there and I said, well, we should use, these evidence-based teaching systems. I can't remember the one that I went in there with. They were like, yeah, we've used that. That doesn't always work. And we use this and this and this. I learned way more from them just going in and sitting down and listening than they could have ever learned from me. And you know what I ended up doing for that task force? I was the secretary. I could type fast, like wicked fast, because I used to play piano and my mom could type fast, my grandma could type fast, and thank God that hereditary fast typing got passed down to me. So I would sit there in the meeting and I would take the notes, not like a stenographer, but close. And I would provide them with the notes. And pretty soon I found myself on the advisory board. And then I found myself helping out with events that were organized. And I listened to speakers and I learned why 24-year-old young people are using opioids. And it was very eye-opening and humbling, where I thought I was going to go in and teach them something, but they taught me. And I think that thought leadership needs to be taken with a grain of salt, because you can't always just go in and tell people and cram stuff down their throats. You need to read the room and learn and go in there with the mindset that you have something to learn. And that was something that knocked me on my butt, humbled me. And ultimately, I won an award from the county's ADAMUS board, the Addiction and Mental Health Services board, for creating all kinds of, I'm trying to think of how to say it, faith community discussions about opioid addiction. I ended up being the faith community person, where, I'm just a Christian. I just go to church on Sundays, but I realized that pastors are one of those people that people with substance use disorders go to in their very weakest moments and say, hey, I need help. I need help now. And those pastors don't always know what to do. So empowering them to understand opioid addiction or substance use disorder in general, and helping them have a warm handshake with the local prevention and treatment organizations was huge. I brought those people to churches and the pastors came in and they learned. So as a thought leader, yeah, you can know all kinds of stuff, but make sure you also open yourself up to learning what's already going on that works really well, and how, even if it's something that you didn't predict, like being connected to the faith organizations, that could be how you truly make an impact. So don't go in with a set vision of what it has to be. Open yourself up to what it could be.
The future's constantly changing, and it's true for our careers. And I think this is an open invitation for anyone who wants to maybe get out of what they're in and into something better, because albeit that you thought you were going to come in and be the expert, but you learned, and over time build trust, and in turn was given, it sounds like, some amazing opportunities.
Yes, and I'll tell you, being the secretary of an organization has a lot of power, because people want to be connected to the person who's communicating information to everybody. I took the notes. You know what I'm saying?
Oh yeah,
I took
absolutely.
I took the notes, and yeah, that worked out really good for me. I was able to contribute and they appreciated it very much. And pretty soon, like I said, the day that I joined the opiate task force, they ended up asking me to be on the board. And I think it's because they noticed, I have this medical background. This girl's
Yeah.
serious. She's taking notes. And, you know, sometimes that can be your in.
Yeah, you're talking about like guilty by association. And I'm reminded of one of my very first side hustle projects. It was a podcast. It was called The Leadership Dojo. And at the time I was obsessed with self-development and leadership, and I just thought, this is fascinating. I want to learn more. And I would interview people that I admired, people that I was inspired by, and people who I thought were leaders in their own right. And inadvertently, an opportunity came up. A pharmacy student listened to my show and I got invited to speak at his college, and I was paid. And I remember thinking, like, this is insane. This is not what I anticipated. In your thought leadership journey, what unexpected or surprises have happened along the way?
Just because of thought leadership?
Yeah, the podcast. Yeah, absolutely.
I'm dying to tell you about these medical conferences where I've emceed these things.
Yeah,
I don't know if it's because I'm a thought leader, though. Because I put myself out there basically as a public speaker, not in the way that you were paid to be a public speaker, but somebody who's a pharmacist who
sure.
can speak confidently in public. I was invited to interview for a position where I moderate the Clinical Olympics, which is a thing that is run by an e-learning company called RMEI. You can find them at rmei.com. So I'm a contractor. I'm not actually officially working for this company. But because I decided to put my shingle out there and say that, I'm a pharmacist who uses her speaking voice, they're like, let's have you come in, via Zoom
Yeah.
and interview for this position. And I must have knocked it out of the park because they offered me the job. And before I even did the first job, they offered me the second job. So I moderated the Clinical Olympics at ID Week in Washington, D.C. in October 2022. Then I moderated the Clinical Olympics for, I'm trying to think what it's called, the American Society of Hematology in New Orleans in December 2022. 2 speaking gigs that I got just because I put myself out there. Now, little did I know that it was videotaped so that all of the people from home who are participating online could see it too. Plus, I had no idea how many people were actually going to be in attendance. I should have asked that. There were more than 200 people live. So it's live. I've got the camera on me, the lights. I'm mic'd. I'm introducing famous people, famous, practitioners in their fields. And no pressure there. And I've never done it before. And I'm mostly a stay-at-home mom and a full-time caregiver for my adult son with autism. But because I put myself out there as a thought leader that pharmacists can be public speakers, I got the job. And I got the job again, and possibly will be doing it again 5 to 6 times in 2023. That's pretty cool.
That's what I love about this kind of work. And for anybody that chooses to do this, is the work pays for itself over and over and over again. I have articles on Pharmacy Times that are well over 5 years old, and that's how a lot of people still find me to this day. The beauty of considering to do thought leadership is, you can do the bare minimum and not rely on your personality, your ability to speak. You can use the written word and labor over them as much as you want and get your thoughts out there. Get your thoughts in a concise way and share it with the world. And once you get people to interact with it, things can start happening. Opportunities can present themselves. You just don't know what can happen. So, of
That's
course, I'm going to recommend that you listen to Kim's podcast, The Pharmacist Voice, if you haven't already. And particularly the episode where you're going to hear Kim talk about her creative process. I think that's a beautiful next step for anyone wanting to build up their thought leadership. Before we end, Kim, any final thoughts about this subject and reflections on your journey?
Thanks for the opportunity. I would say thought leaders affect positive change. Be a thought leader who affects positive change. Remember to think about what's in it for you. Think about what's in it for the person on the other side of the table, and think about what you want them to do with the information. I know I talked about that being kind of like my mantra for podcasting, but I think it's true of life. If you want to do something with your voice, with your pharmacist identity, just make sure that you thoroughly plan it out, not to the point of perfectionism, but to the point of purpose, and affect positive change. Thanks, Alex.
Thanks, Kim, for being here. And as we like to say a lot in our team meetings and with our clients, progress over perfection. Journey before destination. It's not about where you end up, it's about getting there. That is so much fun. Kim, Love hanging out with you. Thanks for hanging out with me in this podcast.
My pleasure, Alex. Take care.